Rosalia may have dropped a decade-defining masterpiece with Luke's, her fourth studio record, and a transcendental maximalist record that blurs the lines of pop, classical music, and art. You guys know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna discuss the album, give my honest thoughts on the record before going track by track and assigning a score. Disclaimer, I am a gringo. I do not know how to pronounce this stuff. I will pronounce it wrong even if I try. I'm sorry. But yeah, let's talk about the formation of Luke's. Rosalia is an international pop sensation with an academic background that makes her a once in a generation artist. She was a student of the Catalonia College of Music in a program that only takes one student a year. Her debut record, Los Angeles, was a product of these studies, while her second album, El Marcore, served as the thesis of her studies and her breakout record. It is beloved for reimagining the genre of flamenco with modern hip hop sounds. It won Album of the Year at the Latin Grammys and even earned her a spot on the Greatest 500 Albums of All Time list. She really caught my attention in 2022 with Motomami, which I found to be a very experimental take on reggaeton that was honestly snubbed by the Grammys despite winning Best Latin Rock slash Alt. It should have been in contention for Album of the Year. Motomami's bold genre blurring and playfulness with song construction and stylings further cemented her place as a curator for music and culture at large, with its influences permeating in other works such as last year's Brat, which I love. For Luke's, the process started shortly after Motomami was released. It took 3 years to make this album. She had began research into different languages. The final record contains 14 different tongues. She said that she used Google Translate before hiring actual translators and teachers, as well as calling on peers to form the album. 97% of the album was done by herself. No AI was used at all, as Rosalia found the results disappointing and unusable for her vision. 2024 marked her teasing this album with interviews, even putting an R4 CD as part of her Imaginal disc costume for Halloween. The album's religious and visual motifs were teased through her Instagram posts, with the first teaser of her actually putting Berhane's music, the sheet music itself, on Substack before properly unveiling the record and its art in late October. Upon its release, it has received universal acclaim, even ranking amongst the best ever reviewed works on Metacritic. It has broken the record for the highest ever first day for a woman who is a Spanish-speaking artist. But is it worth all this hype? My overall thoughts are these. Luke's is an ambitious record. I feel like it is antithetical to modern dopamine-heavy TikTok-ready music. Conceptually, it is about light itself, as the title is Latin for the word light. The album cover has Rosalia in a nun's habit, which is a nod to the record's inspiration, different forms of female sainthood, divinity, and spirituality. And it also encompasses different religions. One particular highlight of mine, La Jugular, draws from Islam, particularly the studies of Sufism. Flexing her status as a polyglot, Rosalia seamlessly integrates many different languages. I heard Arabic, French, German, Italian, Hebrew, Japanese, Mandarin, Latin, Ukrainian, Portuguese, and even more. I think it is a testament to her desire to learn and understand and be of this world. The chosen languages, they actually correlate to each of the song's narratives. I found Luke's to be a work that needs to be taken in front to back to appreciate. For this review, I actually listened to it 5 times, with my first listen being one without any translations whatsoever. I was just focused on the emotionality and production of the work. I cried. With the actual lyrics transcribed, I was devastated even further. It is a bit hard to pin a straightforward story from this album. I found it to be a grand epic bookended by Rosalia's desire to find closeness to the divine and eventually exist in the space between God and the earth by becoming light through death. She herself has said that it is split into 4 movements with unique structure, character, and tempo, the first being about leaving purity, the second about being in gravity and existing with people, the third being in grace, and the final being a farewell to the earth. I found the album to be an adventure through different planes of human living, suffering, and joy. It is both a celebration and a memorialization of existence expressed through different tongues to highlight that we all live and die. Ultimately, before becoming light again, it was recorded with the London Symphony Orchestra, who imbue it with a liveliness that can only really come from a string-heavy composition. Despite being a very abstract record, there are moments like La Perla where Rosalia still gives us a view into her personal journey, though it is less diaristic, but with enough detail for us to know who or what she is singing about. In that case, it was a rebuke against her ex-fiancé Raul Alejandro. Much in Rosalia fashion, there is an active disregard for convention and structure. You can see this in Porcelana, which itself feels like four distinct parts stitched together at whim, but this track in particular unlocked a personal understanding of Luke's. Rosalia's voice is meant to embody the light that she sings about. It navigates the shifts from pianissimo to forte to whatever it needs to be in the moment. It's a unifying and binding element that allows the production to come together into one undeniable truth. I will note though that you should have the physical version as it contains 3 additional tracks, Fokurani, Jean, and Novia Robot, as well as an extended version of Dios and Un Stalker, which I just found superior. There were 2 reasons why I was hesitant about covering this album. One, it was the fact that I felt unqualified to share my opinions on multilingual work, but also because this record is something that cannot be analyzed in a week's time. This is something that we will be unraveling and learning about for years, maybe even decades to come. It's a very complex work, and I'm honored to live in a time where it exists to be studied and experienced. I think Rosalia has done the unthinkable, providing 2 decade-defining works, Motomami, which I thought flourished for minimalistic yet impactful soundscapes, and now Luke's for utter decadence and maximalism in a time where human ingenuity is fronting a battle against AI slop. The following is a track-by-track analysis. A lot of it will be talking about the religious figures behind each track as well as my observations. Take them with a grain of salt. The opener, Sexo Violencia Leontas, it immediately picks up where Sakura from Motomami ends, borrowing its chords for a moment. This track sets up the internal conflict of finding a way to exist in between the world and God. Verse 3 invokes the Christian tenet that the earthly world itself is impure and that pleasure is sin. Hence that title, Sex, Violence, and Tires. Coins and Throats is a reference to an ancient rite where you would bury your dead with a coin in their mouth as a way to atone for their sins and pay for their entry into the beyond. The second half of that verse is about the divine, contrasting it with the horrors of earth with grace, fruit, and the reward for final judgment. However, she admits in the outro that you must first love this world and be a part of it and live in order to find passage into the afterlife. Reliquia starts her journey. It is inspired by Santa Rosa de Lima. This beautiful track sees Rosalia invoke the concept of relics, which in Christianity denote sacred objects that are often related to a martyr or a saint. These objects are actually venerated because they still contain the essence of the said saint, even past death. So metaphorically, Rosalia recounts what she has lost and left behind around the world, coming to terms with her heart being her relic. She name drops losing her hands, her eyes, her tongue, time, smile, bad love, even a blunt, and her hair in an accident on tour that happened in A Coruna. I was particularly affected by the bridge. It's a gorgeous painting of humans being like dolphins jumping in and out of the seas of time before we get this outro from Venetian snares that like evokes ascension and actually brought me to tears on the first listen. Divinize opens in Catalan but flows into English very seamlessly at parts. This track immediately recalls the forbidden apple of knowledge from the garden, again tying into that first movement's themes of sin and earthly being. The instrumental's energy gallops yet feels controlled by her voice as Rosalia sings and compares her body to a temple that is to be worshipped, first like the apple and then her spine as a rosary. She discovers that her destiny is to deify both her inner world and the outer world that she was born to. It feels very sisterly to the works of Bjork, who features later on in this album. There is a lot of Bjork influence throughout the album, and I thought that was beautiful, particularly Fasora. It almost feels in dialogue with that album. Porcelana is one of my favorites. It blends together Spanish, Latin, English, and Japanese. When she had talked to Zane Lowe, this track had actually been inspired by the Japanese saint Ryonen Genso, who is famous for mutilating her beautiful face to find acceptance at a monastery. This sacrifice is reflected in the fragmentation of the song. Verse 1 sees Rosalia embody Genso, the broken porcelain skin breaking to reveal light, and a struggle where pleasure and pain eat each other up. Then we get a Latin quote from the Gospel of John, "I am nothing, I am the light of the world." The bridge is a looping of Dougie F singing, "I know you're scared, know that you fear." It's either a chorus of angels or an internal fear within this character. Rosalia then dips back in, offering courage, a diva who can offer her what she needs to break through, and then she shifts into someone divine, claiming that she can cure and lift and transform before the verse in Japanese, which commits to ruining her beauty because God has dubbed her the Queen of Chaos. I feel like this track is about conquering earthly fear. Then we get the gorgeous Mio Cristo Bianche Diamanti, which marks the end of the movement. It's an aria that she actually composed over a year. I believe that it was inspired by Clare of Assisi. She was the founder of the Order of Poor Ladies, which was a convent that observed strict poverty. It's also about her friendship with Francis of Assisi and how, without a physical relationship, the two had become soulmates committed to their mission. Soulmates is an idea that's played with on this record quite a bit. The diamonds I found ironic in the sense that they chose humility, so they're rewarded in their faith. What I really loved was in verse 2, there's a chiasmus, which is a syntactic cross formed in an A-B-B-A pattern. Gravity, graceful against grace and grave. I found that to be a very clever visual and literary nod to the cross itself. Then we get the start of movement 2, which begins with a bombastic Berghain, which features Bjork and Yves Tumor. Opening with a frenzied orchestral sweep, we get a Germanic chorus about fear, anger, love, and blood in relation to God, as Rosalia sings in German abstraction before switching to a more tender Spanish, where she compares herself to mere sugar, ready to transform and disintegrate into the will of the divine. She understands that when she disappears, she will become something greater. Bjork invokes the voice of divine intervention, embodying the Holy Spirit, saying the only way to be saved is to allow the deity to transform you. The final lines sample a mental breakdown that Mike Tyson had during a press conference, which feels like a shock to the system, but also speaks to corruptive forces and gravity preventing one's ascension. Well, that's my interpretation. I've read other people's brilliant takes on the song. La Perla with Yaritza and Her Essence is a beautiful ballad that touches on Rosalia's faith in masculinity being lost. I found it to be a track about a local disappointment, a national heartbreaker, and an emotional terrorist who has fooled her and robbed her of her power. A friend of mine actually pointed out that this track inverts a metaphor on her collaboration with ex-fiancé Raul Alejandro Promesa. Listening to that track, she'd actually compared their love to a pearl that will always be found if lost because it was worthwhile. Here, she recognizes that pearl is a fake. It is something that can clearly be imitated. The themes of duplicity are all over this. She cites mirages, doppelgangers, a collection of bras, and I feel like Yuritsa compliments her so well. I hadn't actually known about the wrench metaphor of 13 and 14 millimeters, as wrenches come in 12 and 13 and 14 and 15, but not 13 and 14. So it's like a trick. Mundo Nuevo ties Lux to El Marquer through the track Renego. It's also a reference to the classical flamenco track Quisiera Yo Renegar. Again, call me a gringo, I did not get that right, I know I did not. I felt like the wordplay actually came from the shifting of the phrasing. It goes from an unsureness to an absoluteness, moving to the most grammatical way of saying that she would like to renounce the world to find truth. The final phrasing being an emphasis on herself, the I. De Madruga is an ode to the Ukrainian Saint Olga of Kiev, who is noted for her quest for revenge after Prince Igor had been slain by a tribe called the Drevlians. Olga had actually killed 5,000 tribesmen who had falsely believed that they were atoned or forgiven, then later offered peace so long as each house offered her 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. Olga would actually attach sulfur to each bird and send them back to their nest ablaze, burning down her enemies. Within the song, she refers to tongues of fire, which is the wrath of the Holy Spirit, the intervention sang of in Berghain. This track actually is a bit older than the rest of these tracks, as it was co-produced by Pharrell Williams and has been in the works for quite some time, and it marks the end of Movement 2. We begin the third movement with Dios en un stalker. Translated to God is a stalker, written in jest from God's perspective. This may sound blasphemous, but it reminded me a little bit of You're Welcome from Moana, not sonically but textually. This is a song from the perspective of a god claiming credit for knowing your desires, being the wind that rubs your hair, owner of the world and ideas, a labyrinth that we cannot escape. It's also done from a very mystic point of view that almost feels nonsensical and playful. The cut verse on the physical version, which should be released, honestly, you guys have to listen to it, even compares this god to a bodyguard or the sun that calms her down. The chorus suggests through divine intervention, Rosalia can eventually learn to love again. And the key change towards the end, I see this being one of the peak moments on the album. It's an embodiment of Rosalia's creativity as well as the conceptual lightness of the record. La Juglar is my favorite, honestly. It's a love letter to the Arabic language and a meditation on what she's learned from Sufism. The saint in focus is Rabia, whose love for Allah. This was a love that was just for the sake of love, not for fear or punishment nor reward. Verse 1, she refers to a myth that the soul is actually just 21 grams in weight, and she imagines how many stories that weight can carry. The use of jugular is in reference to the Quran passage about closeness to God, particularly the location with the neck is where you are closest to God. The production throughout is immaculate, especially towards the end. Verse 3 is just this lyrical masterpiece where she goes into the connection of everything, comparing small things like haikus to countries to galaxies that fit into smaller things. She bounces from pyramids to armies to the actual Titanic to a golf ball, and it comes to a point where she realizes that the divine itself is infinite, but its truth and understanding only comes from the human heart. Love has no size, but it fits in all of us. The music reflects the tension of trying to fathom the scale of that love. Bokurani is a physical exclusive track that translates to Great Fire. It is based on Santa Rosalia de Palermo, who had actually become a saint by saving her dominion from a plague. Santa Rosalia had actually been meant to marry, but chose to dedicate her life to God. This track has a beautiful distortion throughout the start, and the lyrics speak to Rosalia's peace that she will not marry the man who she had engraved his name onto her ribs. It draws parallels to herself and her dedication to finding love and freedom. The lines about no one throwing rice into heaven is a double entendre for herself and the saint. Sauvignon Blanc refers to a pale French wine and was inspired by Teresa of Jesus, a saint who had renounced material living, which is a theme that is continued from Mio Cristo. In this track, I felt like Rosalia was pondering what it meant to leave it all behind. She name drops pearls once more, stating that her love is her capital. She does not need any more. She just wants the glass of wine with her love. Verse 2 sees her throw away Jimmy Choo's and her wall piano, just to exist in love and peace. It's a very rich and savory track. But the final song of the movement, completing a cycle of embracing the divine and the peace and finally leaving the material behind, is Jean, which is a physical exclusive that was inspired by Joan of Arc. She drew on the advice of Charlotte Gainsbourg when she was drafting this. It's a track that speaks to Joan's self-destruction for the cause that started at 13 when she heard the call of God to save France. Joan would actually turn the tides of war towards France before being burnt at the stake for heresy. Rosalia switches from Spanish to French to embody Joan's state of mind as she makes the final sacrifice, prayers to God as she turns herself over to the divine before being engulfed by the fire. The fourth movement represents her return to the divine, the farewell. It begins with Novia Robot. This track had been inspired by the horror of discovering robots that were shaped like women, but it was also inspired by Soonbir, who is a teacher of the Tao. She had actually also disfigured herself to travel safely. The other female saint referenced here is Miriam, who is a woman who rebelled and is paid tribute to in Hebrew in the closing lines. The opening is a satire calling out female robot fantasies and the robbery of identity and power that she and other women face whenever people use AI deepfakes. Though she definitely made me laugh when she said electric puchina. This track is about liberating herself. There's a brief verse in Mandarin where she goes off using yin as a metaphor to speak about the lack of feminine energy and empathy. The last lines are a call to arms to reclaim autonomy and free man from its own greed and women from the oppression. The Rumba do Perdón features Estrella Morente and Silver Perez Cruz. This track is definitely a banger. It evokes the classic style of rumba. Instrumentally, I found it to be gorgeous and a celebration of flamenco. More fascinating was the story of the song, which recounts a man who steals a kilo from a friend, but this friend forgives him anyway, setting up this theme. Verse 2 recounts a man who leaves for cigarettes and never comes back to his family. It's an often told story, but the streets still acknowledge that that man belongs to the woman. I believe that verse 3 is actually from God's perspective, due to its depth of knowledge, calling out the concept of everyone not necessarily deserving forgiveness, but having that forgiveness anyway. There's humor at the end about lovers and this idea that God is a voyeur or a stalker that's continued. This God jests that it could be a threesome, but if he's only watching, it won't count. Maria is sang primarily in Portuguese, with Carmino providing a beautiful addition, particularly in the fourth verse where Rosalia and her they just build upon each other. This is actually one of the more straightforward and earnest moments on the record, beckoning the subject to remember her, what she's been through, where she came from, and all facets of her life before she passes. Which brings us to the finale, Magnolias, which really closes this album on a beautiful note, paralleling Sakura on Motomami. This track is about understanding death as a celebration of life and transformative in order to reach peace. It was inspired by, I'm gonna butcher this, Ananda Mayima, who was a mystic who was buried in flowers. This track really imagines Rosalia's passing and funeral. Verse 1 uses that even her enemies would cry today as she wishes for magnolias to be thrown her way. In her dream, she imagines motorbikes creating smoke and noise to pay tribute to her life. Gas, wine, pure, and chocolate, these are all pleasures of the earth that she is leaving behind. In the bridge, she has finally achieved that dream of God coming down and her being in between the earth and God itself. Her legacy has been secured and remembered, so now she has peace to become light, returning to the stars as dust, so that she may finally rest. Tying it back into that desire in the opening track. It's like a formation of a loop that just makes this story magical and repeatable, much like life itself. I can't say it enough that this album is such a rich text that I definitely think will age beautifully. Rosalia herself has said that she may never make a record like this ever again, and I don't blame her. It is a 10 out of 10. I recommend you listen to this at least once in your life before you pass. That's how good it is. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning into this review for Luke's by Rosalia. I have always been a fan of hers. I haven't really been following her. Like, I started around Motomami, but now I'm just going back into her discography and enjoying it. I really just admire her intellectuality, but also her spirituality. It was really fun being able to try to find what she was referencing and doing my own research. So let me know what you thought about Luke's below. Feel free to call me a gringo. A quick shout out to my members. Thank you so much for supporting this channel. A big shout out to my subscribers. Thank you guys so much. You're why I analyze music. You guys have challenged me to look into artists that I would never listen to. I've always believed that pop music is a form of internationality and understanding other cultures, and I think this album is a reflection of that. So yes, I will be responding to comments below. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you next video.